Have you ever heard of a man who lived in a barrel? Of a philosopher who, in broad daylight, walked with a lit lamp searching for a man? Of someone who, without the slightest hesitation, told Alexander the Great to step out of his sunlight? This is not a myth or an invented story. This is the life of Diogenes of Sinope, one of the most unusual and radical thinkers of ancient Greece. His name is tied to the Cynic movement, a philosophy that preached a simple life in harmony with nature, freedom from social conventions, and a disdainful rejection of luxury, power, and wealth. Diogenes was a philosopher, but also a provocateur, a teacher, and at the same time, a kind of performer, a man who provoked laughter, disgust, and admiration all at once. He was born in the city of Sinope, on the coast of the Black Sea, around 412 BCE. We know very little about his childhood, but historical sources record that his father was either a minister or a treasurer in the city's bank. There is a story that due to a scandal connected to counterfeiting money, Diogenes was forced to leave his hometown and head to Athens. Whether truth or legend, one thing is certain: that event set him on the path of a wandering philosopher. In Athens, he met Antisthenes, a disciple of Socrates who is considered the founder of the Cynic school. Antisthenes lived modestly, despised wealth, and taught his students that virtue was the only true good. At first, Antisthenes did not want to accept Diogenes as a student, and even drove him away and struck him with a stick. But Diogenes refused to be discouraged. When the teacher told him to leave, he replied, "Strike, but you will never find a stick hard enough to drive me away from you as long as you have something to say." This stubborn attitude earned him a place among Antisthenes' students and marked his later life, defiant, uncompromising, and persistent. Diogenes soon surpassed even his teacher in radicalism. While other philosophers debated nature, justice, or the cosmos, he brought philosophy to the streets, to the market, to the everyday lives of ordinary people. His goal was not to write books or establish schools. He wanted to shock people, to make them reflect on their own values and false beliefs. The most famous story about him is certainly the one with the lamp. In the middle of the day, when the sun was shining over Athens, Diogenes walked through the city with a lit lamp. When asked what he was doing, he answered, "I am looking for a man." He did not literally mean that people did not exist, but that he was searching for a true human being, honest, just, virtuous, because among the crowds he met, he could not find one. This was his criticism of a society he saw as greedy, deceitful, hypocritical, and enslaved by materialism. Another legendary episode is his encounter with Alexander the Great. The story goes that Alexander, fascinated by Diogenes' life and fame, came to visit him. He found him sunbathing. Alexander said, "I am Alexander, the king. Is there anything I can do for you?" To which Diogenes calmly replied, "Yes, step out of my sunlight." This remark became a lasting symbol of defiance against power and wealth. Later, Alexander himself said, "If I were not Alexander, I would wish to be Diogenes." Diogenes lived in Athens, but also in Corinth, where tradition holds that he died there around 323 BCE, the same year as Alexander the Great. He lived almost like a beggar, sleeping in a clay barrel or amphora, eating simple food, mostly vegetables and bread, and owning only a cloak, a bag, and a stick. One of the symbols of his lifestyle was a wooden bowl from which he ate and drank.
But when he once saw a boy drinking water with his hands, he threw the bowl away, saying, "A child has surpassed me in simplicity." This shows how far he was willing to go in rejecting everything he considered unnecessary. For Diogenes, wealth and luxury were sources of enslavement. He believed that a person could only be free if they were independent of desires and possessions. His philosophy was practical and radical. If you need little, if you live in harmony with nature, nothing can be taken from you. He was convinced that social laws and norms were artificial constructs that stifled human freedom. That is why he often deliberately provoked society, doing things considered shameful or indecent, just to show that nature knows no shame, that shame is merely a human invention. His brazenness was not without purpose. It was not mere eccentricity, but a philosophical lesson. If someone said it was disgraceful to eat in public, Diogenes would do so in front of everyone, asking, "Is it shameful to eat when you're hungry?" When asked where his homeland was, he replied, "I am a citizen of the world, a cosmopolitan, perhaps the first in history to call himself that." Diogenes was known for his sharp wit and short, biting replies. When asked how he wanted to be buried, he said, "Throw me to the dogs. I don't care, for when I am dead, I feel nothing." When asked if he would be ashamed to die in a public place, he replied, "On the contrary, I would like it to happen before a crowd, so I could once more show them how little their rules are worth." His life was in complete opposition to the ideals of Greek society, which glorified wealth, power, and status. But precisely because of that, he was so striking and unforgettable. Diogenes was a living criticism of everything Athens represented. Interestingly, though often ridiculed and despised, he was also respected. His wisdom and his courage to live what he preached won the admiration even of his enemies. Although he left no writings, his fame and the anecdotes about him survived for centuries, passed down from generation to generation. When we try to understand Diogenes, it is important to realize that his philosophy was more a way of life than a theory. He did not write books or lecture in formal schools like Plato or Aristotle. His classroom was the street and the marketplace, and his lessons were conveyed through provocations and anecdotes. Cynicism, the philosophical school he belonged to, emphasized a return to a simple life in accordance with nature, the rejection of unnecessary desires and luxurious habits. It is no coincidence that the word cynic comes from the Greek kynikos, meaning dog-like. The Cynics prided themselves on living like dogs, without shame, free, unashamed of natural needs. The dog was a symbol of authenticity. It does not care about luxury, eats when it is hungry, sleeps where it wishes, and ignores wealth or social conventions.
For Diogenes, philosophy was not a mere intellectual game, but a remedy for the soul. He believed that people became unhappy because they constantly wanted more than they needed. More money, more power, more recognition. His answer was radically simple. Discard everything unnecessary. If the loss of wealth, power, or reputation cannot harm you, then you are truly free. When asked what made him rich, he would reply, "Fewest desires." One of the better-known episodes of his life concerns his clash with Plato's philosophy. Plato had defined man as a featherless biped. Upon hearing this, Diogenes plucked a chicken and brought it into Plato's academy, declaring, "Here is Plato's man." Afterward, Plato was forced to add, "with broad nails." This anecdote captures Diogenes' nature perfectly. He did not hesitate to mock even the greatest authorities, nor did he fear disturbing the seriousness of philosophical debates. For him, philosophy was not an academic discipline confined to schools, but a living and practical pursuit of truth. When asked where he came from, he would reply, "I am a citizen of the world." At that time, identity was tightly bound to the city-state. People proudly called themselves Athenians, Spartans, or Thebans. But Diogenes rejected such limitations and declared allegiance to all humanity. This thought was revolutionary and later inspired the Stoics, such as Seneca and Marcus Aurelius, and through them modern ideas of universal human rights. One of the most controversial aspects of Diogenes' life was his willingness to do in public what others considered shameful. He ate in the streets, urinated in front of everyone, and even performed intimate acts openly. He did this not out of mere rudeness, but to show how artificial and meaningless social norms were. When reproached for such behavior, he replied, "If hunger could be driven away as easily by rubbing the belly, there would be no need for food." In this way, he wanted to emphasize that human needs are natural, while shame is nothing but a social construct. There are different accounts of his death. Some say he died after eating raw meat, others that he choked on octopus, and still others that he simply decided to stop eating and let nature take its course. Regardless of the version, it is symbolic that he died as he had lived, in his own way, without compromise. His fellow citizens in Corinth did not forget his importance. They raised a monument to him, and the memory of him spread further through anecdotes that inspired philosophers, writers, and artists for centuries. Although Diogenes left no writings, his philosophy and life lessons survived through traditions in the accounts of others. The Stoics adopted many of his ideas: a simple life, indifference to wealth and power, cosmopolitanism. Even in Christian tradition, we find similarities: asceticism, poverty, freedom from material things, all reminiscent of Diogenes' ideals. Many later authors of the Renaissance and Enlightenment mentioned him as a symbol of the free spirit. His name is still used today to describe someone bold in criticizing society or scorning empty norms. Stories about him are full of sharp humor and witty remarks. When asked, which animal was the most grateful, he answered, "The dog, for you feed it, and it remains loyal, while people forget kindness." Seeing a rich man avoid a puddle so as not to soil his robe, Diogenes deliberately jumped into it and splashed himself up to the knees. When asked why, he said, "To show how worthless clothes are compared to the human body." Once, seeing a young man preening before a mirror, he said, "If your soul were as beautiful as your face, you would not need a mirror." His mockery of luxury was endlessly clever. When he saw a richly adorned temple, he exclaimed, "O people, you have built a temple for the gods, but you live in filth yourselves." Why do stories about Diogenes still attract us today? Perhaps because he lived in a way most of us wouldn't even dare to imagine. He was free in a way we are not, free from the need for approval, free from the fear of ridicule, free from the pursuit of status and power. His philosophy reminds us that true freedom does not come from what we possess, but what we can renounce. In the age we live in, where social media creates pressure to look perfect, where people accumulate things and constantly chase more, Diogenes' message is more powerful than ever. Be content with little, seek virtue instead of wealth, do not be enslaved by the opinions of others. Imagine a man today appearing in the middle of a great city, walking with a lamp and saying, "I am looking for a man." Perhaps we would think him a madman. Perhaps we would record him with our phones and share it online. But the essence would be the same. The message that, in the sea of people, honesty, courage, and virtue are often missing. Diogenes of Sinope was one of the most radical philosophers of the ancient world. His life, filled with provocations, jokes, and witty remarks, was a kind of mirror to the society in which he lived. While other philosophers sought truth in ideas, in the cosmos or in ethics, Diogenes sought truth in everyday life, in simplicity and naturalness. He was a man who broke taboos, mocked the rich and powerful, challenged esteemed thinkers, and was not afraid to look ridiculous if it meant revealing a serious truth. His philosophy teaches us that true freedom comes from within, from freeing ourselves from desires and the fear of social judgment. And perhaps if we sometimes asked ourselves what Diogenes would say about our world, about shopping malls, luxury cars, obsession with fame and status, we would realize that his messages are still valid today. Perhaps we too, like Alexander the Great, would have to admit, if we were not who we are, we would gladly be Diogenes.